My name is Chris Montgomery. I'm a solution architect at Proofpoint. And what we're going to talk about today is some themes and trends that we see on the threat landscape from the purview that Proofpoint has. This isn't really a sales pitch. My role doesn't really have anything directly to do with selling mail gateways or cloud email security. What I typically do is lead a discussion with organizations and how to communicate to their executives or people that can take action on the trends and themes that we see on the threat landscape and how we think that they should react, or on a high level, are there things that they can do to change the way that they've put together the security architecture? Are there things happening out on the threat landscape that you may have prepared or configured your security program in a way that isn't well suited to address those trends? And that's typically the conversation I have. That's how this is going to go. And understand that because this isn't really a sales conversation, the way I like to phrase these conversations or drive them is not necessarily to make it a Proofpoint pep rally and tell you what we do well, because if we do well, you're probably not going to see it. What I like to focus on is what we have challenges with, or the more PC way to say that is where the margins are thin. And we're going to focus on credential stealing and credential phishing today, and that is certainly a place where in the entire industry, based upon some of these trends, the margins are very thin and the risks are very high. And I like to focus there because these are the things that, because of the nature of the problem, my customers and the people that I deal with are typically going to see this and have to deal with this, whether they're our customers or not, or whether they've configured our solution as properly as they can. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And a real quick shout out about Proofpoint, because Proofpoint is where the data that goes into the discussion and kind of the genesis for giving you the perspective on the architecture comes from. We're in about close to 60% of the Fortune 100 right now. And I think that from my perspective, our core most valuable, if I could package it up and give you a product, the most valuable product would not be an email solution, it would be data. We're in probably the most popular threat vector in the world today based upon the attacker's preference. We've built a big team on the R&D side that makes email good, with security research that may not have anything to do with email. I came to Proofpoint from Emerging Threats. If you're familiar with ET Pro, ET Open, that's the company that produces that rule set, and our research team focuses on all threat vectors. That focus goes into making email efficacy better, but it also goes into the understanding that the actors want to be where people work. That's email, mobile, social, and SaaS. And so we need to be well aware of what they're doing on those vectors and protect people in the way that they work. And that takes security DNA that goes beyond just email. But we've got a global sensor network that we use from Emerging Threats. We've got an environment that scans mobile apps, and everything we do is typically, associated with a B in billions. We've just got such a massive scale across the world in a very juicy threat vector that, again, I think the most valuable intellectual capital that I can give you is data. Because with the right people, which is probably the most unrealistic part of that ask, with the right people and the data and all of that threat vectors that I've just mentioned, full life cycle, full kill chain, you could probably chuck 80% of your commercial solutions, use open source solutions, and use that data on them to produce a pretty good security program. That's how good the perspective is. That's how good the data is. I don't think that we could really package that up. And I think, again, the hardest part would be to find, retain the security talent to be able to run that kind of a program. But if you've got full life cycle, full kill chain data, which we use to make where we are in the delivery vector better, you could use that on some open source tools and really have a pretty good security program. But this is where the data comes from. And before I get into the meat of the topic, I want to start out with a story one of my colleagues likes to tell. And I think it really sets the stage. And it's an anniversary of it today, or part of it, as we'll get to. And that really is kind of something that gets into the social aspect of this problem. Can anybody tell me what this is? It's the thing, the Great Seal. This was a gift. This was a gift from the Soviet Union to the incoming ambassador to Moscow from the United States in 1945, right before World War II ended. And the Russians gave this to us and they said, hey, look, we really appreciate your help in the big war, and it's not over yet, but we appreciate all the Studebaker trucks and such that you gave us. We want to present you with a gift that shows us our appreciation. So we got this gift, and we didn't just get the gift delivered. Amazon, that kind of thing wasn't around. They get the pioneers of the revolution, a bunch of really cute kids, to give it to the ambassador, a guy by the name of Avril Harriman. And so basically, you're the ambassador, you get this gift from all the cute kids, lots of pictures, you're coming in, and you say to yourself, all right, that's great, I love this thing. You give it to your team and you say, scrub it for bugs, and then put it somewhere really, really important, like maybe the ambassador's residence in their private study, which is what they did. Well, Avril Harriman, again, put it in his residence in the study, and they scrubbed it for bugs. They didn't find any bugs. Well, it turns out about 7 years later, this thing was bugged. And it was an ingenious device that when you scrub it for bugs, you don't find any active power source, right? There was a guy by the name of Leon Theremin that invented the Theremin, which is a early predecessor to, and whoever's doing that, you're right on. If you've ever heard the song from Led Zeppelin, Whole Lotta Love, or any episode of Scooby-Doo, you know what a musical instrument the theremin is.
The original Star Trek series opening theme.
And the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys is probably the one that you hear about the most. But the way that this thing works is that you've got a bug and a radio that if you blast it with the right radio waves, this is basically the predecessor to RFID technology, if you blast it with the right radio waves, it will transmit. And all you've got to do is roll up to the ambassador's residence in a very inconspicuous vehicle, like this van, otherwise known as a van that if you pull up to a playground, all the mothers go grab their children. But this van would sit outside the ambassador's residence, blast the right radio frequency to the bug, it would then transmit. Only after 7 years, when the British were trying to spy on the Russians and couldn't figure out why the Russians were all of a sudden speaking English exclusively, did they find out that the ambassador's residence was bugged. But it took a little bit of social engineering to get a very technical solution to be that effective. And in very Verizon data breach report fashion, a lot of stuff that was old is new again, where you've got third party reporting the breach. We've got dwell time that is almost forever. Maybe if they had next generation bug security, bug scrubbing, they would have found it. But they didn't tell anybody about this when it happened, when they found out in the 50s. It had been there for 7 years. They sat on this and the NSA tried to develop their own while they were developing the Theremin instrument and contacting the Beach Boys and such. It was only in 1960 when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and you've got the juxtaposition of the social engineering on the Russian side and the very technical brute forcing on the American side in spying, which is the U-2 spy plane. U-2 spy plane is great. It's a technical kick sand in your face kind of thing when you spy, right? I can fly so high, I can spy on you, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to spy on you, and what are you going to do about it? Well, you get a missile, doesn't even have to hit the plane. All it's got to do is get close, knocks the wings off, and we've got an international incident. And here we have the U.S. diplomats doing their best impression of my 5- and 7-year-old boys saying, he did it first. And they wheel out the thing and say, these guys have been doing all that time. I was walking down the street earlier today, and out on the, there was a little This Day in History on a coffee shop. And this day in history, there was actually the U-2 spy plane shoot down over Cuba. So we come full circle. But the whole idea here is that the social component, the I have to get a human to help me, is a very prevalent theme in the threat landscape today. And it's one that the security industry, especially from the vendor perspective, just isn't really ready to deal with. If you go back to WannaCry, think about it this way. When WannaCry happened, I think it was like a Friday, my whole weekend was just blasted in my LinkedIn feed about vendors that said, this is how I would have actually dealt with WannaCry. Who else got their LinkedIn feed blown up with something like that? What I thought was interesting was that about a couple of, maybe it was a month, 6 weeks prior, there was an article that came out that this guy took Google and Facebook for $100 million in a scheme where he just emailed them and said, hey, I'm a supplier, I don't really speak good English, I'm 13 hours ahead, you can call me and we can do this over the phone, or you could just email and we'll do this and I'll give you the right wiring instructions. You bought a bunch of my computers, I want to get paid. They paid him. I would have stopped at 700,000. Well, this guy kept going to 100 million. He got busted. One guy, I think they recovered 90% of that, but 10 million is a pretty good haul, right? It was based upon something, and we didn't hear about it because the security industry as a whole is not set up and addressed to solve for that kind of problem that is totally a social factor type of attack. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. What are the statistics that we see that kind of belie this theme? And you know what? I've got to give it to our marketing department. They do a lot of good things. This slide says a lot of stuff, but I'm going to take a little bit more cynical take on this. What you could really read this entire, from the left to the right, there's a better way to do it. Basically, we could say what they said, or you could say, Cybercrime 101, how do you be a better cyber criminal? How do you be a more effective cyber criminal? Well, this is what you do. Social engineering, right? We see 90% of malicious links leading to credential phishing because if you leave the malware at home these days, this is the kind of stuff that's going to work. We've been set up to defend against malicious code with very good, sophisticated machine, all that kind of stuff. We've got good defenses. They know about it. They're changing it up. Basically, it's easier to trick a human than it is a computer today. Because we've gotten so good on the stuff that's advertised in airports, like I said, you never see user education advertised in an airport. It's just not kick-ass enough, right? There's no real scary, awesome theme to that particular discussion, but it's what's needed here, and they know it. Next, hit them where their people are, not where their defenses are. That whole idea of all those cloud icons is the idea that this castle perimeter protect with a wall is going to work. Not today. If your assets are outside of that perimeter and you can't do intelligence outside of that perimeter with your supply chain and things like that, it's not that, and I use the patent quote tongue-in-cheek because it's not that we're doing the wrong thing. Having the perimeter, defending with the perimeter with all these solutions and the DMZs that we put together is the right thing to do. We've just gotten so good. If you're the attackers, if you wanted to be a cyber criminal that was effective, you'd find another way around, right? This is the way to do it. Look at the statistics. This is with BEC, fraud, phishing, whatever you want to call it. A really good perspective there is that 5.3 billion. They did the same study for ransomware, and it was 1.1 billion. Still a lot of money, but the whole idea is that this is hurting us at a 5x clip. And all you got to do, basically, is why develop malware, pay for exploits that have a very short shelf life, when if you wanted money, all you had to do was email them and ask. And that's about as simple as it gets, but that's basically what's working. And it is something that if we look at it, I'll come back to it again. The security landscape or the security vendor landscape isn't set up to defend against, why don't you just tell me what you wanted to steal? And so that's why this is a big problem. That's why I'm talking about it. We can knock down ransomware at like a 4.9 clip in most cases. You'll see in the graph database simulation that I'm going to do later on, it's not 5 nines. It's not 4 nines. It's probably, the PC answers, it's less than that. But it's something that you're probably going to deal with more often than the stuff that is, I've got really sophisticated code. They've got really sophisticated code. They're going to go at it. And because we've invested in so much of that stuff in the last 10 years, it's let's find another way around. And that's what they're doing. So, where are we today? We've got one really big mega trend that I want to focus on, and that is that if you looked at 2016 into 2017, even into the summer, remember exploit kits? They're basically gone. They're really not on the landscape on any big way, shape, or form today. And when I was at Emerging Threats, that's basically all we did. The ET Pro rule set and the research team there was really, really good at tracking guys like Angler, Magnitude, a lot of the Asian ones like Kaizen. We named Rig. And that was essentially a kit that is developed by somebody that essentially says, hey, look, I'm not a criminal. This is something that you could use for some other purpose. I'm just a developer. If they wanted to use it for nefarious purposes, that's them. And you basically got a lot of non-sophisticated criminals get the kit. As long as you can put exploits up there for things like Flash, you can be a really effective cyber criminal. Well, we see in about 2016, May-ish, this just went off a cliff. And it's because everybody started realizing that there's a better way to do it. The social factor stuff is going to be more effective. CVEs are expensive. CVEs-based exploits are expensive, and they've got a very short shelf life. So I need to get into something like credential phishing, and that's where I'm going to make my money. That's where I'm going to do my damage. And we see it in the, I call it run-of-the-mill cyber criminals, but you also see it from the most sophisticated state actors as well. Remember the DNC hack, whatever your thoughts are on that, that was phishing, right? That was simple stuff, didn't really take any malware. Whether you want to say, and I don't really get into the attribution game, but if you want to say that's a state actor, they do it too, because it works, it's effective, and that's the first place to go. And it's something that if we look at credential phishing, you can do a lot with credentials. Certainly, it's going to be pretty obvious that data and money. Where I want to focus today is trust. Because I think trust, look at it this way, it's the new lateral movement. If I get credentials, I could go after data, I could go after money, I could try to do some sort of thread hijacking and get in the conversation with some sort of transaction, or I could try to steal your W-2s, whatever it was. What we see today most often in the very dangerous or the state actor cybercrime type of thing is that it's the indirect way into your organization, meaning I can go after somebody and get credentials to email and then email you from a totally trusted email account that no email security system is going to block. You're not going to think it's not who they are, even though we don't authenticate email and we authenticate everything else. Email is just trusted like that, right? Now that I get into your supplier or some other organization you do business with, whatever I'm going to do, whatever attachment, whatever link I send you, you're going to click on because you know me. Trust is very big, and trust within an ecosystem is now kind of the lateral movement. I used to have to use a lot of scanning, what's in browser cache, what can I get to, can I pass the hash, all that kind of stuff like that. Now all I need is an email account from a trusted supplier, business partner, or something like that, and I can do pretty much anything I want because we trust email so much. I cover pretty much all verticals in Proofpoint. I thought one of the more interesting ones was state actors would go after universities because that was their way into the think tanks, and that was their way into the military-industrial complex. University would do research on a particular weapons program. Why go after Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and all those people? They've been in the news. Everybody knows about the F-35 and things like that and how they're trying to protect that these days. What about the university, where the security profile is we've got to share more information? Or let's go after the university. Why? Because they often, very often, will email their alumni and ask for money. And typically, their alumni are very emotionally charged when it comes to their school, and they typically give them a lot of money. So if you compromise some account at a university, security might not be up to snuff, and then go email all of your rich alumni and ask them for money for a new hospital that doesn't exist, you're probably going to get a pretty good response rate. Very powerful thing that you can do with credentials. What I want to mention here too is another mega trend. This is in financial fraud, banking Trojans specifically. 2015, kind of about URLs. 2016 is where we get into these mega campaigns. So when we're looking at big peaks, we're talking about 10 to 12 million messages in a particular campaign. The whole idea is, let me get Locky or some banking Trojan, some ransomware, CVE came out, or I got the exploit for it, and I've got code that attacks that vulnerability and installs, downloads malware, whatever it is, that's the kill chain. But the whole idea was it was a volume play. If I just blast enough, I'm going to get enough responses back, and boom, I'm going to steal money, get in, do whatever I need to do. Well, what we started to see them do in about July of 2016, even in today, and this is in one particular type of attack, financial fraud with a banking Trojan trying to steal credential scraping, screenshots, things like that. But the whole idea was, let's not do the volume play anymore. Let's take our time, do our research. The fruits of that research will produce more. How do we do that? We do that with things like specificity, emotions, lures that will indicate that I'm part of a business ecosystem so that you should act now, or fear. The whole idea is if I can get better business data, or if I can get something a little bit more focused, I don't have to go as big, it's going to be more effective. The other thing that might have drove some of that is that we feel like there was an actor out there that was into financial fraud via banking Trojans and stuff, and they've got this botnet or a bunch of agents sitting there reporting, and they've got a big data problem like all you do. I mean, try to go through 2 terabytes of Zeus data. And the other thing they found out when they're trying to get these credentials and monetize them is that, this makes sense to me now, is that how many times do you fat finger your password every day? If you're logging keystrokes and somebody has fat fingered their password every time they've logged in, you've got to now verify all those credentials. That takes time. You've got to find the credentials. And you've got to go out there and make sure that they're still alive before you can sell them. It becomes a big pain in the butt. But they had an install base, and they're on all these PCs. What they did is they went out and stole a bunch of Salesforce data somehow, somewhere. One of these guys procured it, and now they figured, you know what? Instead of trying to get out there with all these malware agents that are going to get blocked by next generation AV and all that kind of stuff like that, why don't we just take the data, come up with really, really specific lures that mention the address, what business you're in, court dates that have your phone number and your company mentioned or your personnel or something really, really specific, and we're going to get a lot more bang for the buck. And that's what they've been doing. Specificity can really give you a lot of return on the investment. If you mention something like, I don't know, sharing docs and cloud services and things like that, you'll get a click rate, which is, I've got the message, it's regarding Dropbox or something like that, and you get about a 13 to 15% click rate, which is good, which if you're in marketing, that's outstanding. It's starting to get dangerous. If you can mention some sort of specific transaction, you'll do a little bit better. But if you really want to go to the head of the class, mention the zip code of the recipient, and you'll get close to an 80% click rate. The thing that really jumps out to me here is that think of user education. If somebody's got the zip code and the message may be coming from typo squatted, the whole point is, if there's nothing in there that we see in our user education that says, this is bad, you should have been looking for it, if we can't tell the difference on a malicious message, a phish, between one that isn't, what's the limit of user education? Where does it hit the ceiling and you say, I can't ding people for clicking on that when I couldn't tell the difference myself? Got a customer that they do phishing, they'll try to do phishing 4 times a year. And if you get phished, you get your paycheck docked, like $1,500 or something like that. And I thought about that, and I thought, man, you might inoculate the population a little bit. You certainly get a culture of security, but how can you dock someone's paycheck when you've got an email and a lure and a message that doesn't really look anything like that anything's amiss? If there's not really any reason why that they shouldn't have clicked, how can you dock them like that? I think that might be a little punitive, but I think it shows you that even user education is well-intended and needed as it is, might have some limits to it, right? And I think it's one of those things that you used to see a bunch of these a couple of years back, and you'd say, I'd never click on that. These days, about once a month, I'd look at one and say, I totally would have clicked on that. Yeah, absolutely. And you can do that with things like emotion. Hope you can see this in the back. This is essentially a real law firm, real lawyer. He got his account hacked, and they sent a bunch of messages from this email address, and they said, hey, basically, your spouse has prepared divorce papers, you're getting divorced, and I'm her lawyer or his lawyer, and if you want to see the documents, go ahead and click here on a real website that will give you those docs. Now, not everybody here probably would have fell for that lure. But if you were having a bad day and you were susceptible to this, do you think that when you clicked on that link, you were going to be thinking about, is this a good link? Is this a bad link? Should I be a good internet citizen here? You're probably clicking from downtown, clicking really hard, really fast, and not thinking at all. And this was really effective, and it actually led to a banking Trojan of some kind. But the whole idea was this was not going to get stopped at any reputation level initially because, again, it was coming from a trusted account. It wasn't coming from an IP in the Ukraine or something in Asia, you know, where you could say it sticks out like a sore thumb. And in here, we capture the emotions. There's another one that's really good where you see somebody say, hey, look, I was at your location, your store, your retail location or whatever, and I had very terrible customer service experience with Phil. Or they'd mentioned somebody that actually worked there. And I've got this complaint, they did X, Y, and Z, and there was explicatives in there, and click on this document to actually see all of the things I'd like to complain about and talk to their manager about. What are you going to do? You gonna click, not click? I mean, it's one of those things that now I've got to respond to this. I mean, maybe this is our brand that we need to protect. So we're getting really good on the lure side to where in my daily function and the things that I do, I have to click. That's why I think it's really kind of tough to say, you know, you're going to dock someone's pay for this kind of stuff when they're getting this good. I think it comes down to we need to start phrasing the problem differently. I hear a lot of people say, my users are ignorant. They're always going to do these things, and they're ignorant. And I say, you know, I think you're phrasing the problem wrong. You don't want to tell the board, you know, I've got a problem with users. Instead of saying that they're ignorant, maybe you ought to say that, man, I'm up against people that are absolutely criminally brilliant. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. It's something that has come a long way. People are taking the time. They've got the Salesforce data. They can concoct these campaigns in a very brilliant, well, you'll see some later, I think, where they've made absolutely brilliant assumptions on human behavior, and it's worked out for them really well. And there's not a lot you can do to stop it in some cases. Can't see it in the back. This is what threat hijacking is. And it's something that, again, with a compromised account, you can do a lot of stuff, even get an effective way to deliver malware that would have been blocked or stopped. We also call this the double fish. On this side, we have an email transaction discussion going on between two trusted business partners. So, hey, here's an invoice, and here's the request doc, put in the wiring instructions, all that kind of stuff like that. It's sent. Immediately, it's followed up from the same address, from the same account, because essentially this was a compromised email account. The attacker, a compromised email account, and didn't start pilfering data. They just waited and waited and waited for this discussion to happen. And they saw this email go off. They log in, and they basically follow up 3 seconds later, 30 seconds or whatever it was, and said, hey, made some changes to the document. Please see attached. Here's the same document, the same name, but in this case, it's got a ton of malware in it. Well, you're already in that discussion. I've hijacked the thread. I've hijacked a trusted thread. How much you want to bet that's going to get clicked on? Malware is going to get installed, off to the races. The double fish is what we do, or what we see when we actually have somebody that is not trusted, and you send them a link or you send them an attachment. You say, hey, check out this attachment on Dropbox or something like that. They check out the attachment. They get the attachment, and nothing bad happens. And they figure, okay, well, you know, this person, you know, I thought it was going to be really evil, but it wasn't. This is great. And then they send you a follow-up. And it's a link or it's an attachment. And then the next time, now that you're trusted, now that my defenses are down, something bad happens. That's the double fish. So I think that what we're trying to, or what I'm trying to communicate here is that simple is becoming preferred. You don't need a bunch of JSON-born malware or try to develop malware that's you know, sticky or exploits that have got that short runway. The stuff that is very simple, that is tougher to stop on the vendor side, is going to be that social factor. And when you start to look at a business ecosystem within social factors, we need to really start to look at the security program from what we've invested in and is it well suited for the social stuff, as well as what we'll come to see here as the new perimeter. And that's the focus of our case study. But before I get to that, I want to say one more thing about genius assumptions on human behavior. If you look at sources of user clicks, we do email security, we have a credential phishing sandbox, we do sandboxing of URLs. We have a system that essentially tracks clicks. So If a phishing message comes in, we rewrite the URL so when the user clicks on it and gets phished, we can track that. We can track what operating system that they use because we see the user agent. We redirect them to the real site after it's been sandboxed. Essentially, we can see who's clicking, if they got phished, and what user agent they used and what operating system they were using it. Well, think about this. All the user education is typically if you got 1080p and you got this big message looking for the danger and all this kind of stuff like that. A lot of people, myself included, experience email on their mobile phone. And when I've got a mobile phone and I'm at lunch and I'm walking or I'm walking to a meeting, I'm not using all the stuff I learned in user education to not click. Genius assumptions on human behavior. Send them the message in the middle of lunch when they're walking down the road, and they'll click on that and they'll say, man, I wish I had 1Password on my phone. I'll just get to it when I get to my Windows desktop. When I get back from lunch, my defenses are down and I get phished. This is typically, clicks in general are typically within 5 minutes of the initial delivery, if it's within the business hours or daylight hours of that particular time zone. So on to the case study. And this is actually a product of a real customer briefing. And it's one that really kind of encapsulates these trends. And it really is something that will try to focus the question to you as security practitioners is, are the security architectures that I'm putting in place up to this particular challenge? The challenge being social factors, things that don't involve a bunch of JSON-born code. And are there other places that I might need to hunt for threat intelligence in my perimeter as well as external to my perimeter? Might that matter now, and how could I do that kind of stuff? So this is a picture of our 500 billion node threat graph database. And we do that in the email system to basically understand relationships at scale. And this is me using the graph to basically show you one campaign that will walk us through the case study. And so it's a graph database. And what you should be seeing here, essentially what this says to me, and I'll explain it, is that email's tough, right? These are essentially 3 sender addresses. The yellow dots are email messages. If we blocked a message, the graph database will put dots around it. If we didn't block it, if it's delivered, you don't see dots around it. And in this case, you're not looking at 5 nines blocked 100%. You hear from Proofpoint, how awesome is Proofpoint? There's danger. Email margin, the margin in email security is very thin. And what's happening here is that we've got a very sophisticated actor. Somebody that knows Proofpoint. Somebody that knows how to get past the Proofpoint gateway and get in someone's inbox. So what they did is they understood that if you go big, millions and millions, you get blocked. You get blocked preemptively. There's a lot of machine learning that will do that all day long. So what they did is they wanted to send about 200 messages, 150 messages. It's a really small and focused campaign. And so they broke stuff up. And they sent it in 3 chunks. And they sent it from 3 sender email addresses. And the best part about the sender email addresses is that they didn't go grab some account like CEO@AOL.com. They actually compromised 3 email accounts within this business ecosystem of this organization. This is all from a particular part of the world in the same geographic region. You'll get into the project, we'll get into the project here in a minute, but essentially this is a global firm with operations all over the world that was working on a really, really, really big project worth billions. Their chunk in this phase was worth 2 to 400 million. And essentially, these were the low-end suppliers. So there were the big guys, there's the general contractor. These are the guys that, drove the trucks or they did something in the supply chain. The point is, we were not going to stop them. That was the first time and the last time that those email addresses were ever used. And they're not coming from the Ukraine or they're not on the spam list. They knew what it would take to get into an inbox in this particular campaign. And they used links. That's the blue dot. And because they broke it up into chunks, we weren't going to do any kind of volume preemptive condemnation. This guy knew us well and knew exactly how to get through. And they did, right? And it was very dangerous because in a lot of cases, their main intent was just to get into the inbox, but they might have seen somebody, I think the one in the middle was actually from like a trade association. They might have seen the actual email address and done all that detective stuff and said, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. I'm gonna click. But their whole goal was, how do I defeat sophisticated email security today? This is how you do it. The one on the right, I don't know how many people are familiar with DKIM, DMARC, all that kind of stuff like that. Show of hands. DKIM signed. Wasn't going to get stopped. We were going to deliver that at the speed of light all day long, and we did. So we did, and we had that customer briefing, and as you can see, hallelujah, we blocked all 12 messages. Proofpoint's, doing awesome here, right? This is going to be a great conversation. Well, we blocked 12, but you know what? We think you ought to get a different perspective on this and try to understand some trends in security and what you might want to do. If we look at the forensics, if we look at the data a little bit closer, it's going to show you some of that. So we blocked 12 messages. Let's look into what they were actually trying to do. The blue dot is a link, and in this case, what do? What was in the message was an Owly link. Owly is just a redirector. You're not going to block Owly, right? Proofpoint marketing would come to a halt. It's never going to get blocked. That email is going to be unique to every one of those 3 chunks, and basically you're never going to see it again. It's not, I mean, you can't put that on a reputation list and say, okay, block this. And as an organization, you can block Owly and Bitly and things like that, but it's probably not very feasible. The guys know it. They got through. They got blocked this time, and we'll get into that. The Owly link goes to a redirector. And this is where things get really interesting, because the redirector is encrypted, and they can do a ton of stuff there. Credential phishing is basically the child of the exploit kits, and it's the same ecosystem, meaning I've got just-in-time inventory-like modularization of the ecosystem where somebody does the template, somebody does the infrastructure, somebody collects the credentials. There's multiple ways to monetize that stuff, and it's all typically PHP code on the back end that modifies stuff and looks where you're coming from. They can actually look at where the redirect, refer, and all that kind of stuff like that, where that IP address is coming from, and decide whether they want to send you to a page that's just going to be a 404 and doesn't get you on safe browse. They can do some really interesting stuff like we see the state actors do, which will actually use something like this, or the landing page and say, did that come from the ASN of the, not that, but did it come from the actual IP ASN of the organization that I wanted? And if it doesn't, I know that it's a cloud security solution, and I'm going to serve them either a 404 or something that's totally benign. And they figure, you know what? When they come back and when they sandbox that, nothing bad's going to happen. And when the user comes from the ASN, from their organization, or from the box that's the POS system, I'm going to blast them. Because the cloud security solution has said that it's benign, go ahead, you can click there. So you can do some stuff that defeats cloud security, cloud sandboxing, and things like that, that it's tough to have an answer for. Now, that's not the only defense that we've got against it, but it's one that you've got to account for or know that could happen. But this redirector gives you a lot of options that way. It's encrypted. The filtering's not going to get seen by other security systems. And what I'm starting to do is to move what I'm doing bad further and further away from the security gateway, from an email side, and outside of the castle. So I go from the redirector, I go to the fish template page. Not going to block Google, right? This might end up in safe browse at some point, but right off the top of the head, you can basically modularize this and say, all right, well, if that URI structure got blocked or got into safe browse, let me go into something that's going to be trivial to keep rotating this. If they block this, I'll change that. And if I block this, I'll change it. If they block this, who cares? I'm never going to use it again. And I'm starting to get further and further abstracted from my security investments, and I'm getting more modular, and it's getting tougher to track. Now we actually go, and this is what it will actually load and look like a PayPal login page or a Dropbox login page. That's where I get fished. And when I get fished, I actually get to where we actually do something bad, which is the credential drop site, which is now sometimes a 4th and a 5th URL on an IP, one that is the most static part of the infrastructure. If you can block or if you can get threat intel, get it right here, because this stuff sticks around for about 6 weeks. This will never be seen again. This is about 3 weeks, and this stuff rotates a lot because it gets in safe browse. But the stuff over here is where you want to understand, because that'll tell you whether somebody not only clicked, but did they submit credentials. And this is typically some VPS where they're using the email service, basically, of the hosted service to email them with some PHP code whenever credentials come in. And a lot of this code, again, it's templatized. A lot of it's backdoored, so it not only emails the guy that bought the code, but it emails the author because he wants to monetize it too. But the thing that was really interesting about this guy, and I think this is genius again, was they gave you a decoy document because they realized that the sandbox solution that we all have invested in is looking for code. Let's give it some code to look at. Let's make it benign so that if we did sandbox this and we were looking for a file and not for an actual full kill chain of a credential fish, we would get a file. We would say that file is not bad at all. Nothing bad has happened here. Let's move on, even though we just got fished. Very genius assumptions on the way that security technology works, as well as how our users actually operate. And we track these guys from, I don't know, this is January through about May. And we noticed that their URI structure had some interesting tidbits in here. Monica Gone, you ever heard that song? Josh T. Pearson, he's a recording artist from Texas. Maybe, maybe not, who knows? I think that the red one is actually the user account that they use to create the Google page. Josh T is actually the domain name that you will see for the drop site. So it was easy to basically say, if that ends up in the drop site, we know it's the bad guys. And josht.pw over and over again, campaign after campaign after campaign. The reason we were talking about this is that this is probably attempt number 2 of 7 against this organization. So that whole campaign, here we go again and again and again. These guys want it in. They want it in really bad, and we'll get into that in a sec. But if you looked at this part of the URI structure, you also saw the date. And we had Global Pacific also using Josh T in April. We had Ghost Rider that was also using Josh T, misspelled in this case. And we had one that really caught my eye, Florida Titles LLC. Think about that. We all protect organizations and enterprises and things like that, but how many people have bought a house? How many people email their broker or their title company the wiring instructions on where to send the money? What do you think they were thinking? It's dangerous. And then, of course, we've got my favorite, Marshall Ibrahim. Google it. Air Marshal Ibrahim is a now deceased air marshal in the Nigerian Air Force. I don't know if it had any kind of bearing here, but this is probably the same group buying from the template provider, and these are probably different groups. But in this case, this is the one attached with this one. But I mean, you can kind of understand the ecosystem and track the actors based upon how they actually set this up or had it set up by whoever was selling the service or the template. And at this point in the conversation, we're going through all this. I love the visibility, the people that we're having this meeting for. But the guy says, this is the CIO, and he says, why does this matter to me? I've got two-factor authentication. We're working on a SAML project so that all of my cloud services will be SAMLized. Why does this matter to me? I'm protected here. Looked at his director of security and says, we're good, right? Well, yeah. However, this is your new perimeter. Because what we saw was that this campaign wasn't just focused on their organization. Hallelujah, we blocked it when it went to them, 12 messages, but the campaign was focused on 48 organizations. Sounds kind of big, but that's a very focused campaign. Usually we see a big campaign, it's 2,400 organizations or something like 3,000 or something like that. It's everybody. This is very focused. And I know it looks like a bunch of blue dots, but remember the big project? If you look at the clusters of who got the most messages, this is about 250 to 300 messages. If you look at target 2, 3, where was the big cluster? It starts to look like the bid team for phase 2 of that big project. $200 to $400 million for this particular company. And in this big public works project, target 2 was the general contractor. Target 3 was the public entity that they were actually doing the big project for. Target 4 audits target 2, and on and on and on. And it starts to look like, the now bidding on phase 2, already a bid on phase 1. Proposals are due in, at this point it was a month. It's all public data. I can tell them, hey, look, this is all coming up. This looks interesting. But what really got me was if you looked at the guys that got like 1 or 2 messages, that was a global law firm that had 2 lawyers that were attempted in this campaign, and that was, this is a far, far away part of the world. Global law firm headquartered in North America. The 2 lawyers they go after are right in that same city. And if you looked at their bios, like all law firms have their bios and emails and all that stuff online, they were the same kind of people that you would want, or the type of lawyer you would want on that kind of project. Target 7 was the one that got popped. How do we know that we actually had all that forensics? The user's got to click, it's got to go to the sandbox, and we're going to say it's bad. Someone had to click. Target 7 was the one that did. So not necessarily saying that the solution's bad. They knew about it. They knew that it happened. How do we know that this was actually the business ecosystem? I like to use the tools that the attackers do. LinkedIn. Director Major Projects is one of the guys that got blocked that they were going after. Proposal coordinator. And on and on and on. And everything kept coming back to this big project. But the real kicker was that there was this guy named Mr. X that was in the lure. He worked for Target 2. Go back to your attack tool, LinkedIn, and it turned out that he was the contracts manager for the big project. So we didn't have to get into this whole privacy discussion of, should I tell you this might be related to the big project? Because once we showed him, this is the lure, look at your message, it's coming from this guy. I mean, his whole LinkedIn profile was, hey man, I am the contracts manager for this big project, and we won phase 1, and we're going on phase 2, and this is great. So didn't even get into that kind of a discussion. But the whole idea was to the CIO is, look, if we go back, if they go after this guy and they get him, they could come and get you. You've got 2-factor authentication, but does that guy? And what happens out here around you, even though that we blocked those 12 messages that came to you, matters here. Because somebody might be after them to get to you. And if you start to share documents on something like Dropbox, or you've got shadow IT in a part of the world that you're not necessarily geographically based in, and they're doing something down there on a project that's worth $200 to $400 million that you don't know about, it matters now. And there are ways to actually do some sort of reconnaissance out here as an organization using things like passive DNS, looking for domains that are spoofing your domain, going after your supply chain. People are registering those, and they're sending them to the supply chain and trying to get in to get to you. Or, get in, email your alumni and ask them for money, and it happens. These guys, pretty sophisticated, they know their stuff, but, it didn't have to be the Mossad or the CIA or, some state actor. I mean, it's something that, like, you'll never know or we'll never find out. They came back 7 times, but even if this is 10 guys sitting in a basement in Romania, they've landed right here. This is dangerous. This became a really easy way to communicate to the board, how does the rubber meet the road in cybersecurity for this organization? I've got $200 to $400 million at risk here, whether they're sophisticated people or not. A child with a gun is still a very dangerous thing. This is something that we need to deal with and understand. And in the case of Target 7, they actually saw that somebody clicked and that they went out and got phished, and they were able to respond and make sure that they could take steps to contain, evade, or do anything subsequent to that. But I'll go back to this. This is typically the part of the meeting where somebody wanted to say, let's play I would have clicked or not. And they say, I want to see screenshots up here in 1080p, and I'm going to tell you whether I've got that ignorant user problem or not. And I said, sure, I've got the screenshots. Let's take a look. And I held up my phone and said, hey, man, that's all you see. If you don't know English, take someone else's English and get very simple with it, right? It's a very terse, form-generated, by design. My English doesn't have to be good. All I've got to use is the guy that's the contracts manager, name it something kind of similar to what the project is, and then this is fuzzy for you in the back. Let's make it a little bit more clear and focused. That's all you see. Send it at lunch, middle of the day. I'm looking down at this. I see a big blue square, and I'm thinking what everyone in here would probably be thinking the same, right? I love the iPhone, but I miss the BlackBerry keyboard because I could have typed out my password in 3 seconds and had this done. I'm not going to be able to do this now. I'm going to go back to wherever I have my Windows PC 7 minutes later, and I'm going to click there, and I'm going to get phished. But in this case, something happened that really kind of gave me pause was when we get this data because we can track clicks, clicks. We see a click from this user again, so we've got 2 clicks. The phone, the Windows desktop.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to have
All right.
the drawings for
I'll wrap up really quick. Basically, there was a forward, within the organization. We went to LinkedIn, and I told the guy that I was doing the, this whole deal with, I said, we go to LinkedIn, if that's IT security, this is great. The world is a safe place. If it's anything other than IT security, it's going to be a long year. Turned out to be some sort of bid proposal, something or other, and basically that's the kind of stuff you can do that no malware can do. I can email the wrong person, try to get someone related to this project to try to get into that bid proposal, whole thing. If I find the wrong person, it is compelling enough for them to actually find them for me. You can't do that with 10 guys sitting in St. Petersburg, Taylor Swift, and Chuck Norris. It's that effective. That's what you've got to worry about today. We see the actual landing page, base 64 refresh. It's just a variable on the PHP backend that gets loaded. Hard to see from a security system. You've got to play that all the way out. And then you get the dummy document. Nothing happened here, move on. They had the visibility to understand that there was at least a concerted attempt to get into this ecosystem for perhaps this project. Didn't really matter if it was meant for this or not. The stakes were high enough to where if this was messed up, or if I got trust within that relationship of the consortium exposed as not a very safe thing, that could have put $200 to $400 million at risk. That was the point to the CIO and above, is that this is where the rubber meets the road in cybersecurity today. Everything that you've invested in the last 10 years doesn't really address this. And we don't like to talk about that as a security vendor community, because this is the kind of stuff that you've really got to be watching within your perimeter and outside of your perimeter to defeat. So basically, we used to have things that would go after, CVE exploits, and I'm looking for published services on the web. Now they're going after people in the way that they work, as you saw. I'm looking at my phone, I've got Dropbox, and maybe they were using Dropbox to share documents. Who knows? Risk was there. It used to be stuff that was on-prem. Start to think about ways you can actually go hunting outside of your perimeter. Passive DNS is a great way to do that. Look for domains that are typo squatted, or it's like mycompany.tripod.com, where somebody's only going to see your company that's an actual domain, and forget tripod. And I've even seen it where they freaked out and thought that they got the CIA's after them, and there was a bunch of banner ads for GeoCities websites or something like that on the O365 login page. It was a terrible template, but because they had their domain, they freaked out. Detection used to be easy. Watch outbound, inbound internet traffic. Watch for the bad guys. You'll find them. Now you've got to watch for bad things that could impact the business way outside the perimeter. And it's this kind of stuff that you need to start thinking about. Everything that I've set up, is it and can it address this kind of stuff? Is there a way for me to understand with threat intelligence or something like that, has an ecosystem or a supply chain been compromised, or is it attempted to be compromised? Because what happens out there will eventually come back and hit you internally. Sorry for going over. I hope you enjoyed the conference, and I hope somebody wins.